Thank you for joining the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston for our weekly online Ministers Forum. I'm the Reverend Dr. Colin, Senior Minister of the Congregation. These programs are conversations with community organizers, scholars, religious leaders, and others about how we can collectively address the present crises. Their purpose is to offer members of our community and all who wish to join us online science-based resources and liberation-oriented inspiration to get through these difficult times. Today I'm joined by Susan Leslie. She's the Congregational Advocacy and Witness Director for the Unitarian Universalist Association and a member of the Organizing Strategy staff team. In her over 25 years of service at the UUA, Susan has led grassroots advocacy campaigns for living wages, LGBTQ rights, migrant justice, an end to mass incarceration, and for climate justice. Before coming to the UUA, Susan was a community organizer. For those of you who are with us for the first time, let me say a few words about Unitarian Universalism. We are a religious tradition that celebrates the possibility of goodness within each human heart, the transformative power of love, and the clarifying force of reason. We believe we need not think alike to love alike. We hope you find these forums a source of connection, hope, and clarity. Susan, thank you for being with us.
It's great to be here, Colin. Thanks for having me.
I'm wondering if you could start out by talking about what UU the Vote is and how it came about.
Yeah, so UU the Vote is a national campaign that has been designed to foster as much collaboration and collective power as possible between the UUA, between UU congregations, UU organizations, including in the states where we have UU state action networks in about 22 states, with some particular focus on what we've been calling Tier 1 states. States that are really strategic in terms of a lot at stake for the elections, UUs who really care and want to volunteer for the effort, UUs who can contribute staff, such as with state action networks and social justice staff from their congregations, lots of volunteers, and most importantly, statewide partners and local partners that really want to join with us and have us join their efforts for electoral justice in 2020. UUs have always been part of electoral organizing. Every 2 years and every 4 years, we've always mounted some kind of resourcing, from grants for UU congregations to webinars, but this is a really staffed up effort that our current president, Reverend Susan Gray, helped us launch with the organizing strategy team last summer in 2019 and said, what if we called it UU the Vote? And what if we ask people to vote love and defeat hate and really get our electoral organizing aligned with all the organizing we're already doing for justice? So the idea was not to ask everybody to stop what they were doing, but to add an electoral component to that work as they work for what they're passionate about, whether it's climate justice or LGBTQ rights or migrant justice. And we have found that the grassroots groups and national groups that we work with have all done the same. The whole political landscape among justice organizers is one of, especially as we've gotten closer and closer to the elections, pivoting towards electoral justice. So that's what our about, being part of that broader ecosystem and looking at how we can bring as much UU strength to that as possible and our values.
So you mentioned values and this idea of voting love and not hate. And I think that leads to sort of a natural question of what do you think the theological significance of voting is for Unitarian Universalists, right? Because we're not a grassroots, coalition of community organizations. We're a religious tradition. So what is the sort of theological significance of us engaging in these kinds of activities of turning out the vote and get out the vote, registering people to vote? How is that a religious activity for us?
Yeah, that's a good question, Colin. I mean, obviously there's the fifth principle and our belief in the democratic process to govern both our own congregations and institutions as well as society. But way beyond that, I think about Reverend James Luther Adams, who talked about what is the role of religion. It's to be prophetic. It's to call out and speak truth to power. And one of my favorite quotes from him is that the prophetic church's role is to make history and not just be pushed around by it. And in the times we're living in right now, I just think that is so critical, and that we do have a moral imperative and an obligation to be out there with our values, struggling as part of broader society about how are we all going to live together on this planet in an equitable way and preserve our planet. And, we do have a legacy. We've all often heard about Reverend James Reeve and Viola Liozzo. We have shed blood for voting rights, and we've certainly advocated very strongly for voting rights, from the days of women's suffrage to abolition to the civil rights movement to the most recent struggles to win the protection of voting rights, which unfortunately did get overturned by the Supreme Court. But we've been part of coalitions from the Poor People's Campaign and others to work to protect those. So, and in terms of voting love and defeating hate, I think that's just a really broad, for us, right, universalist message of saying, this isn't just about parties or particular individuals. This is about really the social compact. And gosh, if people of faith don't have something to say about that and to stand with the most vulnerable and the least of these, what other better role for religion is there?
So I think it's interesting. I think I heard at least sort of two theological ideas there. One is ecclesiastic, like what is the purpose of the church, where you're drawing from James Luther Adams. And the purpose of the church is to be prophetic, to speak out about what the world is and what we would like it to be, and how to name the gap between those two things and point the way to move towards what we'd like the world to be. And also kind of what is at the root of our theological tradition, this idea of love rather than hate, and that God is love. So I want to kind of maybe try to dig a little bit deeper into both of those functions, or to those theological ideas. So one thought that I had, kind of because you mentioned Adams, was actually that the fact that he came about a lot of his understandings of ecclesiology, of the prophetic function of religion, through his study of the dissenting church movement during the rise of Nazism in Germany. And I'm wondering, sort of within that context, basically Adams studied people like Bonhoeffer, who, or studied with people like Bonhoeffer, who were trying to bring together churches to confront Nazism. So I'm wondering, sort of within that framework, like how do you see UUs or Unitarian Universalist congregations really trying to bring justice into the world, not just through electoral activities, but through sort of local congregational activities, right? So we've made this pivot towards electoral organizing, but kind of, the election comes every 2 or 4 years, depending on how you look at it. What should we be doing sort of throughout this time, especially as we seem to be in this time of incredible political polarization and many, including myself, would argue, rise of fascism and totalitarianism?
Yeah, sticking with Adams, he also said part of the prophetic faith role is to interpret the signs of the times, make meaning about what's going on, and then figure out what you need to do to address overcoming and overturning oppression or dismantling oppression. And so I think the most important thing for congregations to do is to actually be in relationship with people in our broader communities, and to know what our own social location and relationship is within that, and to actually be creating networks, creating partnerships, being in coalition to do that. And so it really does mean having a power analysis, which I do think is a spiritual task, to be able to look at who is actually controlling the status quo, What alliances do we need to make to change that? What leverage do we have as congregations, between our voices, between the influence we have, between the resources we can bring, even, especially, again, in non-COVID times, our buildings as community spaces.
So could you give an example of a congregation that you think has done that very well? I mean, maybe you can't, as a UUA staff person, play favorites, but I think it's really helpful for people to have like sort of very concrete, examples of congregation X did something like this. Oh, that's something like, we could do. So can you think of a time a congregation developed a power analysis and sort of moved on a particular issue that made a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pick a really small congregation because people always say, oh, if it's a big congregation, you can do that. All right. UU Congregation of Miami, they have 82 members on the books. And they have very much, been doing the work that a lot of UUs have of wrestling with white supremacy and how to dismantle that. And here they are in Miami where their own demographic is largely white, though not completely at all. And definitely have some very vital members of color. And they looked at the fact that they have a large Latinx and Black community in Miami. And also they were the site of a notorious detention center, which I'm really pleased to say they were one of the lead groups in helping shut down. And so what they did is they really looked at, you have to know what your own members care about or you're not going to be successful. So it's not that like what they cared about didn't matter, but what they worked to do was connect their passions for justice with groups in the community. So they've had a very strong relationship with a American Friends Service Committee-led coalition that helped shut down. It was called the Homestead Detention Center that housed juveniles. And then they also have been working with New Florida Majority, which is it's a community organization that's in several counties in Florida, including Miami-Dade, that does ongoing work for racial and economic justice. And right now they're also working with them on electoral work. And that coalition has both a C3, just to get voters the information they need to be registered to get out to vote, and a C4, where they've been able to endorse candidates that share their values and fight for their values. Of course, we haven't, as congregations, been able to do the C4 part, but they were doing door knocking. Now they're doing phone banking, and it's actually a phone bank that UU The Vote has now stood up as a national one to help them, because they've just been showing up week after week. And we're like, okay, we're going to bring you some reinforcements.
That's really great. And so what was their power analysis? Like, what did that look like?
Well, it's from just basically looking at who lives in your city and a power analysis for the purpose of dismantling oppression. Who are the groups that are actually successfully organizing people, have a base, have leaders that are respected? I don't mean respectability politics, but leaders that are loved and valued by the communities that they're organizing, and who do want allies and volunteers and have a role, and who resonate with UU values. So, I mean, that would be the primary one. And then with them, they're able to make a broader power analysis of, okay, if we're going to do some research and cut some campaigns to move justice forward, which city councilors do we have to get to? Which state reps do we need to, the political analysis, as well as even, what are the corporations that are in the way or could be helpful? So, but it's really through, because I don't think congregations necessarily are community organizers, but we can work with community organizers to get taught this kind of power analysis and to figure out our role within it.
Yeah, I mean, here in Houston, we're working now with, we just actually voted to join, the board voted to join at the August board meeting, a group called the Metropolitan Organization, which is affiliated with the Industrial Areas Foundation, for I think exactly those reasons, like a realization that if we wanted to have a broader impact on the city of Houston and the region, and to some extent the state of Texas, we needed to work with other organizations that had some capacity and some commitment to similar values that we did. Because I think that one of the things that you mentioned a couple of times is networks, and like and this is a very Unitarian Universalist thing, is this understanding that we are much stronger together than on our own. Why do we have congregations? Because we're much stronger together as individuals than just isolated by ourselves. Why do we work with other organizations? Well, because we can move things more together than when we're on our own. So I guess I wanted you to see if you would pick up a little bit more on this question of voting love rather than hate, and kind of what, to some extent, where does that come from? I mean, okay, so it's a universalist theological idea, but a lot of religious traditions say, well, that's we're going to draw a distinction between the secular and the sacred, and like maybe God loves everybody, but that doesn't really matter in terms of how we live our lives today. But vote love, not hate, is a very strong theological statement about we should be engaging in the secular realm as a religious tradition. So I'd love to hear your reflections on that and why that is so important for Unitarian Universalists and so distinct, maybe not distinctive, but central to who we are.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, while, we have a legacy that's both wonderful and also painful in terms of where we've lined up.
Sure.
I think that, our best aspirations are to be for justice, for beloved community, for people. The Standing on the Side of Love campaign that we stood up shortly after President Obama was elected. And now we call it Side with Love because we listened to disability rights folks who said, please change the name. But I think that has been an impulse, at least from national, but since it so resonated with our congregations across the country, and you saw those yellow shirts everywhere. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we got it right, that this is very much what Unitarian Universalists want to internalize about who we are. Mm-hmm. I also think, just as back then, when Obama was elected and we said, this wonderful coalition has come together that elected him, but there's also a lot of fear and potential backlash coming. That was why we wanted to do Side with Love, mm-hmm. to help connect people in their communities. I mean, I remember one of the very first actions was a congregation in Riverside, California, that was allowing their space to be used for day laborers to be able to assemble. And there were some really extreme Nazi-like reactionary attacks on them. Mm-hmm. And one of the first stories we wrote from Side with Love was about what that congregation did to take that on. Mm-hmm. But I also want to say, I just think we were very intentional about this for 2020 because there is such a rise and trend towards fascism coming out of the White House and part of Congress, especially the Senate, mm-hmm. that needs to be countered, and that our values really are mm-hmm. the antidote for all the fear and bigotry and, let's just say it, hatred, mm-hmm. That we're seeing directed at a number of communities.
Well, I mean, I certainly agree with you and would think that's First UU has made a major commitment to UU the vote, and that we've partially with some funding help from the UUA and partially from resources that we had on our own, hired a 30-hour-a-week voting justice organizer to help with these efforts through, I think it's November 20th, but basically through the end of the election and a bit beyond.
Yeah.
Which I think brings me to a question of, okay, so like how can congregations engage in UU the vote? I mean, like, I know First Church is organizing a coalition of congregations to do things like mail postcards to people who may have been removed from the voter registration lists, phone banking, but sort of how in general can congregations engage in UU the vote?
I do believe, and the campaign does as well, that the best justice work is always local, because as we've already been talking about, it's through developing relationships with local organizations that we're going to have the power to move together for justice beyond this election.
Mm-hmm.
That said, there are about, 11, 12 states that we've identified that really could use some help in getting out the vote, where UUs are working with partners. And they're places that often have kind of razor thin margins, so that really helping everybody who can vote with the message of vote, love, defeat hate. So we are certainly trying to attract particular voters, and we're also focusing on the historically disenfranchised voter, and what gets called these days low propensity voters, people who don't always get the calls from the major campaigns and parties, are often overlooked, who are targeted by voter suppression. So that's who we have been particularly reaching out to with both the postcards, like you mentioned, and phone banks. So on the other hand, so like California is not one of those states, at least for the national election, that has like razor thin margins. They, however, I just met with their UU the Vote team. They are working on Prop 17, I believe was the number, that would get voting rights for people on parole. They have one in California, voting rights for people with former felony convictions, but now they're going for parole. And I think that, a liberal or progressive state has a role in electoral organizing, because they can sometimes like start carving out some space for the kinds of initiatives that, status quo thinking would say, oh, that could never happen. And they're like, look, it's happening. We're doing it here in California. You can do this in other states too. So I think that that's great. At the same time, I have been in touch with California ministers and justice teams, asking if they could come twice a month to one or two of the phone banks that we are doing in Florida, in Wisconsin, and Ohio. And we're doing it in a way where we're all UUs and we're gathering in, and we're, we ground and center ourselves. We get trained together. We make our calls. But then we're also there hanging out on Zoom, where we can like ask each other questions, or just report a great conversation we just had, or one that was troubling, just to get a little support. And then, we come in at the end and really hear about how we did, and we debrief, and we celebrate doing the work together.
That's really great. I think that really is a wonderful way to mobilize across the country right now during this time of pandemic, when it's so hard to engage in some of the things that people have traditionally done, like knock on doors, because of the pandemic.
Yes, and that's one of the, as I've been recruiting people, points I've been making, Reverend Colin, because a lot of our folks don't really like to phone bank. And aside from the thing of like, well, sometimes we have to do things we don't like, it's also actually really important that we are developing a cohort of people getting comfortable with doing this, because we are in pandemic, and we need phone banks for things besides just elections. The group I was mentioning, New Florida Majority, they did 300,000 phone calls to their base in March when COVID first hit, to just see how people were doing, and then launched a major fundraising effort to get grocery gift cards to the people who said they were struggling.
That's great.
And they were able to do that all through the phone, because they couldn't have the canvassers on the doors anymore. Yeah.
Well, I think that actually that moves towards something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I know you think about, but I think it's good to sort of get out there, which is the idea of capacity building, right? So like we have this tendency to gear up a lot for elections, but elections come, every 2 to 4 years. And as you said, like politics is often, as much local as it is national. That great example in California. And I guess maybe this is a statement rather than a question. I would love your response, which is I think that one of the real advantages of kind of efforts like the UU the Vote and things is that it allows people to learn how to organize over time, so that, as we get past this particular point in time, we can have sort of more muscle, more ability to sort of do other kinds of organizing going forward, right? Because like the election will come and go in November, but there'll still be, no matter who wins, there's still going to be a pandemic. There's still going to be a resurgent white supremacist movements and fascist movements in the United States, and a whole host of other things. And so, so I don't know. How do you think about capacity building as it relates to kind of UU the Vote and what we're doing in general?
That makes so much sense. I'm glad you asked it, because I left out one of the key pieces we've done with the UU the Vote campaign. Is we started an organizing school this summer, and it's called It Starts with Faith. And we have been both from teaching people how to message with a faith lens as you get out there and work for our values, to how to form partnerships like you and I were just talking about, how to do power analysis, how to do digital organizing. These are all recorded. We've had 500 registrants. We capped it at 500.
Wow.
But the next one coming up is, I guess it's actually this Wednesday, and it's called November 3rd and Beyond, and really looking at both some scenarios we may have to deal with in the immediate context of getting all the votes counted, but also exactly what you're saying. We're still going to need a movement to really, be able to work for justice at this time, both from maybe we could actually even get some of the policy wins that we've all been working for a long time through in 21, or maybe we're going to be more on the defense, trying to stop detention and incarceration. But we're going to be looking at these various scenarios there. So that's just one thing. I agree with you. We've been trying to shape the whole campaign in a way that people are learning how to organize in an ongoing way, pace ourselves, develop the relationships with partners, and, figure out what we can do and what we can't do. And that's part of authentic partnerships, right? You're honest about what you can deliver and what you can't, or maybe you have to change the timeline. But yeah, definitely to have those skills be at the center of this.
I think that that's on some level a real key point, right? Because in the United States, we now talk about the religious right a lot. And the religious right didn't just come out of nowhere. It was very intentionally built over time, starting in the 1960s, with people like Jerry Falwell Sr. and the creation of Liberty University and a whole host of other institutions, mostly funded by corporate dollars, as an effort to sort of get rid of grassroots economic organizations and unions and things like that. There's a great book by Kevin Cruz out there, if anyone wants to read it, on the I can't remember the exact title, but on the religious right and how it came about. And I think that people who are on sort of the broader religious left would be well advised to learn from this idea of, we have to figure out how to mobilize over time to really build the world we dream about. And I think exactly what you're talking about is just so needed, and been so pleased that in the last few years the Unitarian Universalist Association has really, and not alone, right? Because we have group like William Barber II and Repairers of the Breach and the Poor People's Campaign and on and on, who have sort of made a similar effort to rebuild a very strong, robust religious left to vote, love, and not hate. Such a great phrase. So, Susan, we are running out of time, and I thought I would see if there's anything else you would like to share before we have to draw this conversation to a close.
This has been great. I love your questions, Colin. Really made me think about things in a broad and deep way. And that said, I do just want to give the little quick sketch of where we're going in these 50-something days that we have left till the election. So first, of course, people should go to the uuthevote.org website where you'll see everything that I'm going to tell you right now. We have developed a Vote Love Defeat Hate worship service that people can either live stream, or we also have the different components of it recorded as videos so that people can pick and choose and incorporate into worship services they might already have planned. There is a homily from Susan Frederick Gray. So those are going to be available on September 22nd, National Voter Registration Day. And we are encouraging people to use them on the 27th of September or October 4th, or any Sunday through November 1st. So we want to ground us in faith. And then on September 23rd, we are going to have a big old UU the Vote rally. Now, in January, we launched the UU the Vote campaign, and we had 1,500 watch parties, I believe. Biggest thing I've ever seen in the time I've been on staff, which showed us there was definitely appetite and energy. Okay, then in March, we did another rally, a gathering in that we called How We Thrive. And you're one of these people that I was working with about something we might be able to get going on the ground, and we had to change all those plans and deal with, okay, how are we going to do this during pandemic? So that was How We Thrive. So now on September 23rd, we're doing Gather the Spirit, and we're going to come together to gather ourselves for getting us through to the finish line, and as you say, developing capacity for beyond. There will be music, there will be prophetic speakers, there will just be reports from different states and congregations about what they've been able to do. And our goal is 1,000 congregations are going to reach 1 million voters. And I think we're going to make that. We're at 650,000 now,
Wow.
Though we still have some reports we haven't counted yet. So that's why I think we're going to make it. And plus, we've just launched all these national phone banks that people can find. And then we're having a week of action that we're calling Harvest the Power. So Harvest Our Power, October 21st through 27th. All this will get rolled out on the 23rd for us to do a whole bunch of phone banking and get out the vote work on November 2nd. So that's the trajectory. And then, as I said, at the organizing school this Wednesday, we're looking at what might be the need for people to be out on the streets to make sure that the votes are counted, or to be making calls to their election boards and other elected officials. What are partners going to be asking us for? What is our capacity going to be to, right after the election, fight for the election results and then move towards 2021?
Well, thank you so much, Susan. And for those of you who are from First Church who are listening to this, you should know that we have made a commitment to to contact 11,500 voters as part of this campaign. So if you want to be part of that effort to help us make our, I guess it's quota, next week actually Reverend Scott will be speaking with Kieran Spears, who's our new voting justice organizer for First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston, and who's working with, I think it's 8 other congregations now and helping them coordinate their volunteers throughout the state of Texas. So thank you, Susan, for being with us. It was great to talk to you. And for those of you who are watching, if you found this video to be helpful, I hope you'll consider joining us for our weekly worship service. It's posted online each Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Central, and features music and prayers in addition to a sermon. Thank you to our staff for making this video possible. It was produced by Christian Holmes. Alma Viscara assisted with the editing. We'll see you all online soon and in person as soon as possible for us to gather again. And please remember that no matter how isolated you feel, we're all in this together.